nevertheless an important part of this country's tradition. This year's May Day rallies will continue that American tradition of dissent and protest for a more humane society. People around the country, working on a variety of issues, have embraced the new May Day movement. It isn't just about workers' rights on the job, or immigrant rights, or civil rights, or even about raising the standard of living for all workers. It's about what kind of country we want to be. And I really like that idea of commemorating May Day as the work of bringing about the kind of country we want to be. And that's what we're doing here this morning. We're commemorating the work of a group of dedicated leaders who have been working hard to bring about a better, more sustainable, more equitable community right here. And it's going to be a beautiful day. So, and before we launch into our program, we have a few introductions. I first want to bring up Anita Smith. She is the Public Education Coordinator and Heron Hall Manager for the Laguna de Santa Rosa Foundation. And she has a few words of welcome to this beautiful place that we're able to use this morning. So.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Anita Smith. I'm the Public Education Coordinator here at the Laguna de Santa Rosa Foundation. How many of you have been to this center before? Quite a few, and some of you who are new. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Leadership Institute, for the work that you do in the community, all of you, and I applaud you and appreciate your dedication. We're happy to have you here today. This is Heron Hall. It's about 3 years old. The Laguna Foundation leases a few acres here on historic stone farm. Many of you may have passed the old white farmhouse for years and seen it all falling down, dilapidated. That 1872 farmhouse was restored. We finished restoring it in 2009. That's our office. We finished this building a few years ago. This is also a working farm. That's why we appreciate your parking in certain places to leave access open for the Day Dairy, who runs some cows on the farm, as well as Stuart and Denise, who are organic farmers here. You may see their Percheron draft horses sometime today, or Whiskey Pete, the miniature horse, big and small. The bathrooms are right outside the hall there. You're very welcome in your breaks and in your lunch. Appreciation for this amazing wetland of international importance. And it goes all the way from Katahdin clear down to the Russian River. It's the largest tributary to the Russian River. So we have a lot of wonderful volunteers who help us in many different ways. I have a brochure up at the gift shop desk if you're interested in our work. We also have a lot of interesting programs coming up, all about geology, groundwater. Marcus Trotta is going to be talking about groundwater in a couple of weeks. We have open houses, second Saturday of the month, and art and music. And we're going to have Tape Jack doing a concert here on June 6th with poets like Larry Robinson giving poetry readings all about birds. And a wonderful example of how we're melding nature and art to inspire appreciation. So I'll be around all day today. Another staff person will be around in the afternoon as well. Ask us questions. Rick knows a lot about this place. Thank you very much, Rick, for being here and all of your support. Am I forgetting anything? I think that's it. So enjoy the day, and thanks again.
This event, seeing your presentations of your projects, the culmination of your year's work is just a reminder to me of why those of us who support this organization are doing it. You are why we're doing it. And being here is also just so very meaningful to me, because it was falling in love with this place, with the Laguna, that got me into politics and social engagement in this community in order to protect this particular place. So I want to, those of you who know me know that I can't say anything without doing a poem. So You may have heard this one before, but this one speaks very deeply to me about why we're here. Wendell Berry says, "Our understandable wish to preserve the planet must somehow be reduced to the scale of our competence. Love is never abstract. It does not adhere to the universe, or the planet, or the nation, or the institution, or the profession, but to the singular, the sparrows in the street, the lilies in the fields, the least of these, my brothers and sisters." He says, "Love this miraculous world that you did not create, but which is a gift to you." And I think that's why we're all here, is to love this miraculous world, and also our fellow humans that inhabit it. As Gwen reminded us, May Day is a time when we should be celebrating common people like us who are laboring to make a living and create a better world. So it's so good to be reminded of that, particularly on this beautiful day. So I want to introduce, as you probably know, our dear friend and longtime executive director, Tanya Nara, will be leaving us soon. And on December 14th at Ulupico Housing, we're going to...
May 14th.
May 14th. May 14th. You know, I'm having numeracy problems these days. Anyway, part of an aging brain. May 14th, we're going to be honoring Tanya, and you'll all, if you haven't already gotten the news on how to do that, you will. So, I can't say that we're replacing her because she is irreplaceable. But our new executive director, Liz Watson, is here.
Step into those shoes that Tanya has filled so beautifully in all of this time. I come to you, I live in Petaluma, but I come to you from the Nevada Chamber of Commerce, where I ran the leadership program there for 7 years. And it was a beautiful experience, wonderful people, really dedicated. And the environment is something that is dear to my heart as well. So I'm thrilled to be here and doing the good work that Tanya and the board and Rick started so many years ago. And in the spirit of partnership and in the spirit of understanding that we all have something to give and offer and to reach out, we very much wanted to film today. So we have 2 members from the Nevada Community Television, Shannon and Nick. And it's because of the partnership that I've gained through the time I was in the business community that I was able to reach out to that executive director, Pam Paisley, and say, could you provide us with a film crew? Yes, of course. And at the end I say, well, how much will that be? And she said, a simple donation. Now that's partnership, and forget that county line, right?
Using podiums that I actually wrote out what I wanted to say, because keynote speaker is always a little intimidating to me. And I love the words of Wendell Berry, because I thought so much about how to talk about leadership. I don't want to talk about it in the abstract. I want to talk about it in the singular from my own experience. And hopefully in relating my experience, you'll glean a little bit of wisdom from me, because that's what a keynote speaker does, is words of wisdom. And my whole thinking about this was encapsulated by the sign that we saw driving up the driveway here, slow down, enjoy the view. And that's something I've always had a really hard time doing. I just left public office after 21 years. I started in 1993 on the Santa Rosa Planning Commission. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what inspired me to do that. But I was put on the Planning Commission by a very unsuspecting city council in Santa Rosa. progressive in City Hall. And to say the least, he was not particularly welcome. And the things that he had to say were not particularly, people didn't really want to hear it. But back in 1993, the Santa Rosa City Council had agreed to a secret subsidy of the development of the marketplace that's now down on Santa Rosa Avenue. And Rick didn't think that subsidy should be particularly secret, so he blew the whistle and he started talking about it in public. That did not endear him to the City Council. I knew none of this, by the way. In 1993, I was a young lawyer raising my 3 young children. I lived on Manzanita Avenue in Santa Rosa, which is this beautiful wooded area, olive trees, fir trees, redwood trees. And at the time, they were starting to develop or discuss developing Fountain Grove Parkway as a 4-lane expressway, basically a freeway, and it would cut off the end of Manzanita Avenue. So I was reading all this in the local newspaper and getting pretty darn alarmed. And I'm the one that doesn't like to just sit around and complain, so I thought, okay, I hear they want some planning commission applicants. I'm going to go down there and apply. I knew a couple of developers and a couple of real estate people and a couple of business people from my law practice, so I called them all up and said, hey, I want to do this. At that point, I was basically a blank slate as far as politics was concerned, and went through the interview process, and this is my second time around, by the way. And because they so much wanted to get rid of Rick Tice, so I think the theme of my talk today is you just never know. You just never know. And I look back on my 21 years in public office, and I found all these times that I just never knew. I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know that Rick and I were going to end up to be the best of friends and the greatest and strongest of allies. I didn't know that I was going to be carrying on his work and his message, as well as the work and the message of my great friend, Patricia Wiggins, who's now deceased. I didn't know. I just didn't know, nor did anybody else. So I got appointed to the Planning Commission in 1993, started going to my meetings and reading all my stuff and learning. And I'm one that just doesn't open her mouth until I've observed what's going around me and what the dynamics are. But I'm a lawyer, and I'm a litigation attorney. And what I do is I ask questions. And I didn't realize that asking questions is a very dangerous thing. That is very challenging to people. I was just asking questions out of curiosity, and I wanted to know certain things. And I started to find out that people around me were getting very defensive when I would ask these questions. And then I started trying to understand, well, why are they so defensive? Who is protecting what? And the more I started to question and the more I started to find out, the more alarmed I really became at whose interests were really being represented at City Hall in Santa Rosa. Now remember, things are very different now. In 1993, there were no progressives, or very few progressives, or actually people who would not identify themselves as progressives on the City Council or the Planning Commission. And we didn't even really think of ourselves as progressives back then, or environmentalists. It just wasn't as defined as it is now. But I began to realize that it really wasn't the interests of the people that were being represented. It was the interests of developers and business people who are part of the community. But I believe in a balance. And so those of us who considered ourselves progressive, we didn't really have a voice. So I started to speak out a little bit more. And of course that was not well received. But I found out that members of the community were listening. And members of the community were paying attention. And they felt that I was bringing a new, fresh voice to the Planning Commission. And so a group of them approached me and asked me to run for City Council in 1996. I remember I had young children at home. So that day I went home and I had dinner, prepared dinner, which I always did all the way up until my kids graduated from high school. We all sat down, we had family dinner, and we always talked about our day. And my ex-husband said, well, how was your day? And I laughed and said, you'll never believe this. Some people asked me to run for City Council. And all 3 of my children are looking at me, and he says, well, what did you say? And I said, no. And my oldest daughter said, hi. really took me aback. And why? You know, I had to re-examine my own assumptions. And my assumption was I couldn't be a mother of children and run for office at the same time. So I re-examined that and ultimately, obviously, said yes. And in 1996, it was when the UGBs were first on the ballot in Santa Rosa. That was my platform. The UGBs and the redevelopment of downtown Santa Rosa, the revitalization of downtown Santa Rosa, bringing a train to Santa County, and restoring Santa Rosa Creek. That was my platform. And my political advisors said, I'll never forget this, oh, nobody wants to hear about a train. Oh, nobody cares about downtown Santa Rosa. So, all these years later, I feel a little bit vindicated. Okay, so I ran for city council in 1996, and again, you never know. So here I am. I grew up walking. When I was a child, we had only one car, and my dad took that to work, so if I wanted to get anywhere, I had to walk. So my entire life, I've been about pedestrian safety and an enjoyable experience as you walk. I'm also a bike rider, or I used to be, before I hurt my back. And in 1996, I forget when it was adopted. I think it was adopted, I think our bicycle and pedestrian master plan was adopted in 94, 95, somewhere around there. And in 96, 97, we had a proposal in front of the city council about redeveloping Yulupa Avenue. And I think it was Yulupa Avenue, it's been a while. And I remember that the bicycle master plan included bike lanes striped on Yulupa Avenue. But nobody mentioned it during our public hearing. It was going to be striped without bicycle lanes. And I said, that doesn't sound right to me. But one of my flaws is self-doubt, so I didn't raise the issue during the public hearing. But after the public hearing, I went to the traffic director and I said, don't we have a bicycle plan? And he looked at me and I said, doesn't the bicycle plan call for striping bike lanes on Yulupa? And he started thinking and he said, I think you might be right. And he went back to his office and he dusted this plan off that we all worked so hard on. And he opened it up and said, yes, it does. And so he brought it back again with the bicycle lane striped in. But that plan had been put on a shelf, gathering dust, and nobody even remembered it was there until I brought it up after this hearing, thinking I must be mistaken because nobody else brought it up. You just never know. So that plan has obviously gotten dusted off and used. And years later, we now have bicycle paths and bicycle lanes, and we're well on our way to implementing that entire plan. So in 2000, I was approached by yet another group and asked to run for county supervisor. And that was against Tim Smith, who's since retired. And I, silly me, said yes that time. And I ran and put up a good fight, but we lost. But what came out of that, a number of things came out of that. But one of the biggest things that came out of that was a blue-green alliance. There was a coalition of environmentalists and labor that for the first time came together to support my campaign. And we united. And we started the Coalition for a Better Sonoma County, which is still stumbling along. But what it did, and this has since been recreated throughout the state, what it did was it created this very strong alliance where environmentalists find it difficult to move an agenda forward alone, and labor finds it difficult to move an agenda alone. And we don't all have things in common necessarily all the time, but we have enough in common that we all need to work together. And we know that we have common adversaries. So we've developed this alliance, and I think it served us well because 15 years later, we've adopted progressive majorities in almost every city council throughout the county and potentially on the board of supervisors. Some of those majorities have been short-lived, but at least they're there. And I've learned that progress is 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. And when we take that 1 step backward, it's a time to regroup, to rest and recharge, and go back out and do it again. And that's how we managed to get things moving along. So in 2004, my good friend who was then in the assembly, Pat Wiggins, was forced out by term limits. And again, she came and asked me to run, and I said no. Many of you remember, for a long time I said no. Until finally one day I said yes. Finally, yes, okay, let's do it. And again, it was my children that made me do that. They asked me, Mom, why are you saying no? And I started to think, well, maybe, I need to be I'm a woman of a certain age, by the way. I remember when women were not supposed to run for public office, we were not supposed to become lawyers, we weren't supposed to speak, and we had to speak. In fact, I was told I couldn't be a lawyer because I'd take a job away from a man who had a suppressed stand. So I remember those days. Very well. So my thinking was, well, maybe I need to be a leader to provide an example for my daughters. And the thing that really clinched it was I thought to myself after that, maybe I need to be a woman leader to give an example to my son, which was equally important. And so I decided to say yes. And here's a little tidbit of you just never know. Just a few months before my election to the state assembly, I was arguing my first case in front of the California Supreme Court. And I was terrified. I was so frightened and nervous. My voice shook and cracked, and I could barely get the words out. And I was standing at a podium like this, and one of the courtroom staffers took pity on me and brought me this tiny little cup of water filled with the brim, and my hands were shaking so hard I couldn't drink it. But so during all this, the Chief Justice, who was then Ronald George, Chief Justice, was sitting there. He was the timekeeper. He was reading his mail. I'll never forget that. He wasn't paying attention to me at all. He was reading his mail. And here I am trying to, advocate for my client who's reading his mail. Cuts me off in mid-sentence. Ms. Evans, your time is up. And I lost the case, by the way. I hate to say, but I did. So not more than 4 months later, I'm in my assembly office. We're talking about the budget. And in comes Chief Justice Ron George, asking for more money. You just never know. So I told him my experience with him. And we had a good laugh. And because I am a lawyer and I believe in the administration of justice and how important the judiciary is to a free and functioning democracy, I promised to help him. And we became the closest of allies again. Another situation where you just never know. And ultimately, you heard, I'm the first and only woman to be awarded the Stanley Moss Defender of Justice Award. So I hope I'm not taking too much time, but there's a little bit of stuff I wanted to tell you about what happened in the assembly. I thought I was going to the assembly to advocate for environmental causes, to protect the North Coast, and to do all those things that we sitting here in the Laguna care so deeply about. But what actually I was sent there for, or called there for, however you want to put it, what my karma was to try to protect the foundations of what we consider to be a good place in California. In 2007, at the end of 2008, you may remember we had a historic global meltdown. Lehman Brothers, unheard of, declared bankruptcy. Well, the week after that, I was appointed chair of the Assembly Budget Committee and the Joint Legislative Committee on Budget. And so it was up to me, basically, to act and to speak on behalf of the entire legislature, both the Assembly and the Senate, and to push back on behalf of the Democrats and our agenda against the Republican governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I had no idea what I was getting into again, but I had 8 years of experience with municipal budgets on the San Diego City Council. I'd always served on the Budget Committee, and I'd been on the Budget Committee in the State Assembly for 4 years at that point. And my belief is a budget is not a bean-counting document. It isn't the bottom line that counts in that budget. A budget is a moral document. It is inherently moral. It represents your values. It represents where you are willing to put your money. And so I didn't believe that my only job was to balance the state budget. I believed my job was to balance the state budget and to mitigate and minimize the impacts on the most vulnerable Californians. Well, the Schwarzenegger administration didn't quite see it that way. This was a crisis, and in crisis there is opportunity. And I happen to have been reading at this very moment Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine. Seriously, literally reading it as these events were transpiring. And I started seeing, maybe I was a little paranoid from reading it, but I started seeing what the Schwarzenegger administration was doing. They were trying to close down parks so they could privatize them and ultimately sell them. They were trying to shut down programs such as food stamps, which the federal government primarily funds in the state. They were trying to they actually proposed shutting down all health care for young children, for low-income children, just eliminating them. They eliminated programs that provided breast cancer screening programs for low and moderate income women, mostly Latinas, by the way. Everything they wanted to do was to basically yank out the democratic fundamentals of the state of California. I could go on and on. I wrote a blog, by the way. If you're ever interested in what happened back then, and I need to write a book based on my blog. It's at maureenevans.blogspot.com. It's pretty horrifying when I go back and I reread what we were actually being called on to do. Schwarzenegger had, he created a panel that looked at income tax and the way that California revenues are collected. And what they came back and proposed was basically a flat tax, which is horrendously regressive and would fall hardest and heaviest on low-income Californians. So it was my job to push back against all that. And Schwarzenegger is a pretty powerful man. I'm no fan, by the way. I'm even less of a fan than I was back then. But pretty powerful. And I didn't have a whole lot of tools at my disposal. So the one thing I did that I think really turned the tide was I brought people into the Capitol and I held public hearings. Now I'm from local government. Public hearings is what we did. They don't do public hearings in the Capitol. We have hearings, but I wouldn't call them public in the way that the general public comes up and talks about the issue before you. So I did that. I held 2 weeks of back-to-back daily hearings. There was even a photograph, an infamous photograph of me on the front page of the Los Angeles Times above the fold, sitting there in my chair with my eyes closed because I was holding back the tears when a young woman who was HIV positive came and said that we were cutting out the program that provided her life-saving drugs, and she didn't know how much longer she'd have to live. That's the kinds of stories that we heard. And that went on for weeks, day after day after day, literally hundreds of people coming and telling us their personal stories. And the upshot of it was, we didn't get everything we wanted, but Schwarzenegger sure didn't get everything he wanted. That was not what I had planned to do when I went into the assembly, but it ends up being what I did. And I had planned on retiring from public office in 2010 when I was turned out of the assembly. Pat Wiggins at that time was in the Senate, but she unfortunately got very, very ill and had to announce that she wasn't able to run. So I put aside my plans to go back to my law practice, and I ran for state senate. And again, I just kind of was doing it because it was a thing to do, and it was kind of interesting, and Governor Brown was going to be elected, and I wanted to see what it was like to work with a Democratic governor, and I'm glad I did that. And I'm glad I did in retrospect for another reason. Again, that economic crisis had long-lived results. And California, it wasn't long before California was on the forefront of the foreclosure crisis. And in the legislature, every year, somebody tried to carry a bill that would give homeowners some amount of rights in the foreclosure process. Because California has a non-judicial foreclosure process. That means nobody is looking at the papers that get filed. Nobody oversees this entire process. The banks come in, take your home, they're signing documents fraudulently, they're having people sign documents where they know absolutely nothing. There's questions about whether or not the chain of title is accurately passed because of this entity, this private entity called MERS, the Mortgage Electronic Registration System. They're bypassing our counties with respect to registration of documents. whole host of problems that, many years from now could raise their ugly heads and create an enormous number of problems for people. Plus, people are losing their homes. So in 2012, I believe it was, the two houses of the legislature decided to form a joint committee on the foreclosure crisis. And at that time, the Senate was considering appointing somebody who was basically in the pocket of the banks. He was then the chair of the Banking and Finance Committee, which I ended up taking over a little later, by the way. Anyway, so they were going to appoint him. And we knew he had come out really in the beginning and said, I do not support allowing homeowners to sue the banks. That's off the table. And I said, well, wait a minute here. I'm a lawyer. That's the only way we can enforce this. So we kind of battled it out with Daryl Steinberg, and Daryl, to his credit, appointed me as the chair. And so again, I shone the sunlight on this whole process and brought people in, homeowners, to tell us their stories. And I remember clearly the bank lobbyists would sit in the front row, and these homeowners would come in and testify. And I'd be listening to these people, and we'd be crying, they'd be crying, they would not. Very good stories. Very good stories. So the upshot of it was, after all these hearings and with the work of Attorney General Kamala Harris behind us, we ended up adopting the Homeowners Bill of Rights. It's the first piece of legislation of its kind in the entire United States. It allows homeowners finally the right to sue the banks if they do it wrong. Very limited, but it's the only tool we've ever been able to adopt for homeowners. And when I get discouraged about the influence of money in the capital, and I do that often, I remember the Homeowners Bill of Rights, because it was hand-in-hand combed out with the 5 largest financial institutions in the world, and the people won. So we'll see how far I get. Hopefully we'll get a good result. So anyway, that's just to say you never know. You never know where you're going to be. You never know who your allies are going to be. You never know what you're going to be called on to do. And I have to say, my role in the legislature is a big surprise to me, because I've always been quiet, and I've always been shy, and I've always been reluctant to speak up. So I think that's changed. So I want to wrap this up and leave you with a final message. And I think I just did. Prepare for the unexpected. I always remember what Abraham Lincoln said. I will prepare, and sometime my day will come. And the idea is to prepare yourself for whatever may happen. Abraham Lincoln surely did not know what fate had in store for him. But he prepared. And look at what he did. He changed the course of history, and he changed the course of so many individual lives. And with your work here at the Leadership Institute, you've begun that process of preparation. But to what Abraham Lincoln said, I also add what Woody Allen said. 90% of success is showing up. So true. You have to prepare, and you have to show up. And I'm going to add my last, my third point. The other 10% is speaking up. Prepare, show up, speak up. It's all I've ever done. It's all you'll ever need to do. And thank you very much. Before I was called up to speak. This is kind of a watershed year for me. My youngest child just graduated from college, so I no longer have kids in college. Yay. I've left public service after 21 years. Legislators don't have a pension, so I don't get to say I'm retired. I turned 60 this year, which seems like a big event in my life. And I'm really just kind of waiting for the next adventure to reveal itself. I joined the board at Greenbelt Alliance, which I'm really excited about. Yay, Jake. So, I don't know. I'm waiting to find out. I know I enjoy practicing law, but I also know that that's not something that satisfies my soul particularly.
Noreen did not talk about it.
You just never know.
Because she's a shy, retired, modest soul. As that the courage that she has always shown.
Yeah.
And you could figured that out listening to these grand tales. I haven't read your blog, but I'm going to go back and read it now and encourage you to become an author.
Don't read it before you go to bed, it'll keep you awake.
But I just wanted to say one thing. I was lucky enough in the early part of my political career when we were both on councils to fight some of the good fights with Noreen. When she went to Sacramento, somewhat removed, not that we weren't still friends, not that I didn't try to stop by when I was in Sacramento, but if you track what she said about being prepared, being ready for the unexpected, and speaking up, and then you add courage.
On that note, courage is a funny thing. Courage is not the absence of fear. And you know, everything I talk about, everything I did it with great trepidation and fear. Courage is the desire to get beyond that fear, and the willingness to get beyond that fear. Courage is finding yourself in a situation and just doing your best. And you know, sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. That's all it is. I don't particularly think of myself as courageous, but I do think that it's important to do your best, show up, speak up, and get a leg up.